what does the Dodgers back-to-back championships, the budding, burgeoning dynasty, the overwhelming, endless bags of money given to incredible baseball players, what does this all actually mean for the state of baseball? Now, obviously, the backdrop to this question is that the collective bargaining agreement expires at the end of next season. There is an overwhelming assumption within the industry that at least during the offseason, the league will lock out the players during those negotiations. And there is an expectation that there's a possibility that we will miss some number of games. The Dodgers' success, both on the field and, I was about to say in the ballot box, on the field and during free agency, has unleashed a very understandable discussion about whether there should be a salary cap in our sport, and if there is a way to instill more equity in our game. Before we begin, I would like to say a couple things. Number one, my opinions on this are not fully formed. I do not have a passionate platform on which to stand or to, champion. I am unsure. I am uncertain. My opinion changes, not drastically. I'm not like burn down the Dodgers one day. I'm not oscillating to extremes, but I do not feel settled. And I think that I hope that that's okay. I know as prognosticators, we're supposed to give you the heat.
Yeah.
But I don't know how I feel. And I just want to, I'm open to more information and having conversations, et cetera, et cetera. That's the first thing. And related to that is, if you, a fan, feel a way, it's probably legitimate how you feel. If you are a Pirates fan and you feel hopeless, that is beyond legitimate. If you are a Dodgers fan and you feel like the other teams should just spend more money, that is also legitimate. And so I think as we move forward, it is important to hold all of these takes and perspectives as fair and incorporate them as we try and make sense of what we're doing. So that is a very long-winded introduction. I will now kick the rock to you, Jordan, to begin.
Yeah, I mean, I think I share a lot of those feelings where you're at as I am trying to process this. And I think that, I remember a year ago, people were already trying to have this conversation. And I probably came on here. I know I was having these conversations off the air. And I was like, guys, relax. They have not won again yet. A year ago at this time, everyone's like, they're just going to win the next 5 World Series. And I was like, can we not just assume that? Because baseball is really hard. And it's funny because in some ways, of course, that sounds silly as we sit here now talking about their back-to-back titles. And yet there are elements of this season and the series that we just, started to wrap our minds with, that we just watched, where it's just like, it wasn't inevitable. Think about the absurd things that had to happen for them to still win. Now, is that an argument in their favor that it was always inevitable, that they coasted through the regular season and had these level of struggles at the end of the season? And why did they end up winning? Yes, Miguel Rojas had the swing of his life out of the 9-hole. That's amazing and improbable and could happen to any team. They also had an unbelievable collection of very talented pitchers that are making more money than almost every other team can possibly afford. Whether that's Yamamoto plus Snell plus Glasnow plus Ohtani plus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're kind of stuck between acknowledging that it wasn't that easy. Now it was for the first part of the National League postseason, as we saw. But then also how close they were to losing and how different this conversation would maybe be.
Yeah.
And then you get to the point where you're like, that's silly. Does that end result, because of how close it was in Game 7 of the World Series, actually impact the kind of conversation that we're having? Because the other thing is, if the Blue Jays, but the other thing is, if the Blue Jays had one, and we're going to do more Blue Jays conversation later this week, we might be being like, well, yeah, because the Blue Jays also were the 5th highest payroll. They had all this money. They both of these teams spent big time to try and get to this position, and they deserve that credit, but also they might be inspiring some of the same feelings of like, well, we can't compete with the Blue Jays. Forget the Dodgers. That's something that other teams are feeling. I think the way we would talk about the Blue Jays would be more reverential because they are not viewed as this evil entity the way that the Dodgers are. But just thinking about how
not in America
would or should be is kind of silly.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny, right, that the Blue Jays, who are this, media conglomerate owned behemoth that is like they're the David and not the Goliath, is very funny.
Yeah, but they're not David, right? They're not.
I know.
So,
but they're not Goliath. They're like
the Dodgers are Goliath, but that doesn't mean that there is a David.
Yeah, like for Old Testament people, I'm in my parents' basement. They got all the books right here, actually. Like, who's in between David and Goliath? Like Samson? Could Samson have taken down Goliath?
I'm not prepared to do.
I know we got rabbis listening. Rabbis,
That's
email
true.
us.
We definitely do.
Email us, baseballbarbacast@gmail.com. But you're right. Like, okay, so let's say IKF gets a better secondary lead and he's safe at home, which he should have. I'll stand by that. You're so sick of that one, but I'm not. I'm still texting with people about it, dude.
Yeah, no, I know. It's fine.
But like, does that
he's safe.
Significantly,
Blue Jays win.
Like, Blue Jays win. He's safe. Blue Jays win. Okay, no dynasty. Everything's fine. Like, that also feels empty to me. But at the same time, that the Dodgers won changes the public perception, and the public perception is relevant to a point. So what should be done? I don't know. I am still hesitant about the concept of a salary cap. I don't like the idea. I think that artificially capping what players or people can make is problematic and antithetical to the country we live in a way. Like, if we're going to do capitalism, like, do it. However, I think that the hopelessness that other fan bases feel is a problem. I think that the enormous gap between what the Dodgers are spending and what the Pirates are spending is a problem. Now, what the Dodgers can spend and what the Pirates can spend, right? The can and the R is different, and you need to find a way to push the floor up is more important than pushing the top down, in my opinion. How do you get there? I don't know. This is where we're diving into the economics of baseball. But I just keep going back to the idea that the frustration that other fan bases feel is legitimate, but that frustration, again, I'm not telling people to do, should be directed more towards their own team's lack of action than at the Dodgers' overwhelming course of action. The way that the Dodgers are operating is reasonable and rational within the framework that exists, right? So again, I'm talking in circles. Does then that mean we need to change the framework that exists? I guess maybe so.
Yeah, and this is where I also go back to the point I made when we referenced what Jeff Passan wrote about Dodgers versus Brewers, where it was like, this is really going to show us because you have the big market versus the small market. And I made that point at the time. I was like, well, let's see what happens next year. And I'll say that again, because
the year is 2033. The Dodgers have won 12 in a row, and Jordan Shusterman hops on Baseball Barbacast AI earbud Google Glass and says, let's see what happens next year. Will they win it again?
I understand why you're making that joke. I'm saying that more in the context of just like what the discourse is when literally we are heading into the lockout. So yes. My point about it at that point was not the same one that I was making last year, where it was like, let's see if they actually win again. It's more about what are we talking about in the literal weeks leading up to this conversation? Because public perception is a huge part of it. And this is, I think, my last point about, as we do think about big picture, is this going to impact, labor negotiations and everything, which is that it's also some of the things we were talking about before. regardless of how it impacts labor and the economics, which is just that like baseball's doing pretty well. And is how much do the owners and the players and all this want to fight over these things for reasons good or bad on both sides, and get in the way of a sport that clearly has a lot of positive momentum? That is the real existential question that I think we are going to be talking about.
But that has less
once we
to
get to that
do
point.
with the Dodgers, in my opinion.
Specifically, yes and no.
Specifically, the Dodgers. Like, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's relevant because I think, and we've seen this in other sports, like, is it good to have a team that everyone at the top that everyone is gunning for? Is that something that increases television ratings, increases attendance, increases? Because that is now part of the Dodgers story.
So is the problem that there is a dynasty, or is the problem with how the dynasty was built, exists, operates, is maintained? Right? Because if you want to call the Patriots or the Chiefs a dynasty, or the Bulls a dynasty, right? The Bulls obviously a dynasty. Like, you have these teams that build these empires of sport. Is that the problem? Right? In and of itself. Or not? Like, if I'm just trying to think of an example, right? Let's say the Royals beat the Giants in 14 and win it again in 15, and we're talking about or like the Giants from 10 to 14, right? Like, is that the problem, or is the problem that it is this big market team with endless bags of money, right? That is winning for that reason and not just because they're like skilled at the hard parts, you know? Again, the Dodgers obviously are good at all of it. And I think one thing actually I would like to hop in here and say is the Dodgers' financial might helps them with player development. Like, I don't want to just pretend that they're signing Tyler Glasnow for like $120 million, and then they have like, you know, a bunch of dudes they found on the street who are like middle school assistant coaches that are running their hitting development program. Like, no, they're spending gobs of money on the best coaches they can find and the best tech, and right, like, that money matters too. And so I think that is also important to recognize for this conversation. And then I guess the last thing that's just sticking in my craw, and none of this is really related, is how much does the public perception actually matter at the negotiating table? Right? I remember having a conversation with someone, I can't remember, like, I'm not just saying, I cannot remember whether it was the league or the union, someone who works there, about how fans are not in the room and how at a certain point, the people negotiating don't care about the fans and what they think and what they have to say, because it doesn't matter when you're doing the arguing. And I think that is true to a point. However, it is relevant as it pertains to the Dodgers, because I feel like it will empower 25 owners and Rob Manfred and Dan Halem, who does a lot of the negotiating, and Morgan Sword and all these people at the league. It will empower them more to push for a cap, because more people who care and follow the game want it than they did, 5 years ago. And I think that is something that the union is working against as they enter negotiations next year, is that the public perception has shifted. I think more than any time in the game's union labor history, the public perception was on the side of the Players Association during the last negotiations, right? And I think part of that is just the way that the media talks about the sport, and the way that fans are more educated, and the way that like a lot of the owners got kind of cartoonish in the way that they were speaking. And it was very easy, and Rob Manfred calling it a piece of metal, like all these things, I think made it easier for the Players Association to frame the debate in a way that kind of benefited them. I don't think that is as easy, as simple, and as like straightforward for them this go around, because of how many people want a cap and how simple, like the idea of a cap feels and smells simple as a solution. And I think that the union is going to be up against that. And I do think that that is connected to the Dodgers winning. I think that if the Jays if Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is safe at home, I think that it is slightly easier, as silly as that sounds, for the Players Association to argue against the cap. And that butterfly wing flapping series of events is stupid and silly and, trivial and bizarre, but I do think that it is relevant to a point. If you cannot tell, I am parsing through this live on the air. As I said at the outset, my ideas and opinions and perspective is not fully formed. Neither are my arguments. And I hope that that's okay, because this is ugly and complicated and annoying to think about. It is not what we want to be talking about on this podcast. Because we like baseball. We like the sport. And that is why we do this, why we love doing it. But as things become relevant, we will certainly talk about them on this show.
Yes, I agree with all of that. And also, yeah, you can tell we're still in the early stages, and we're going to keep talking about this for better or for worse over the next year. And also over the rest of this offseason. I maintain that what happens next postseason will make a difference in kind of what we're talking about, because if the Dodgers flame out in the first round, everyone might just be like, what's the big deal? And if they win again, it's all this times 100. But also this offseason will make a difference too, because the last thing I'll say about the Dodgers before we take a break and go around the league and talk about some other teams is that this roster right now is not perfect, and it is getting older, and their outfield kind of stinks, and their bullpen, which they clearly did not use at all to win the World Series, but you have to get through the regular season, is not in a good place. They did not spend their money very well last year, if we're being honest, right? I mean, Snell, yes, that worked out, but Conforto was a disaster. Tanner Scott was a disaster. Kirby Yates was a disaster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which means they're going to go try and spend a bunch more money this winter again, too. And how that influences this conversation will certainly be interesting. And I'm sure we will have versions of this discourse throughout the winter as well.